Story 1. The 3:17 a.m. arrangement. They say children's spirits are the most restless because they don't understand death. I used to think that was just superstition. Now I know they're not restless, they're still waiting for a bus that will never come. I've worked night security and janitorial services for over 15 years. I've seen weird stuff in empty buildings, shadows that shouldn't be there, doors that creak when there's no wind, the usual nonsense that makes day shift workers roll their eyes. But I'm not some jumpy kid who gets spooked by every little sound. I'm methodical. I document everything. I take photos. I verify facts. That's why what happened at Lincoln Elementary still keeps me awake, even though I quit that job 3 months ago. Lincoln Elementary sits in a rough part of downtown Chicago, one of those old brick buildings that's seen better decades. The pay was decent for overnight work. Clean the classrooms, check the locks, make sure no one's breaking in to steal computers or copper pipes. Simple routine. I'd been there about 2 months when Mrs. Patterson, the principal, pulled me aside one evening before my shift started. "There's one classroom you don't need to worry about," she said, avoiding eye contact. "Room 14. It's been sealed since spring. Just don't go in there." The way she said it, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me, should have been my first warning. For weeks, I followed her instructions without question. Room 14 was at the end of the kindergarten hallway, and I'd walk past it every night during my rounds. The door had this official-looking seal across it, yellow tape with some school district letterhead. But I noticed things, little things that didn't add up, like how the hallway always felt colder near that door. How my flashlight would flicker when I got close, even with fresh batteries. And how sometimes, just sometimes, I'd catch a faint sound coming from inside. Not voices exactly. More like shuffling. Like someone moving toys around very quietly. The first time I actually saw something, I convinced myself it was a trick of light. It was around 2:30 a.m., and I was mopping the main hallway when I noticed a soft glow coming from under room 14's door. Not electrical light, something dimmer, warmer. Like those battery-powered nightlights parents buy for kids who are afraid of the dark. I stopped mopping and listened. The shuffling sound was there again, more distinct this time. Plastic clicking against plastic. Wooden blocks tapping together. I pulled out my phone to record the audio, but the moment I hit record, everything went silent. Dead silent. Even the building's old heating system seemed to hold its breath. I should have left it alone. Any reasonable person would have. But I'm thorough to a fault. It's gotten me in trouble before. I needed to document what was happening, so I started keeping a log. Every night, same routine. Walk past room 14 at different times, note any anomalies. The pattern became clear after a week. Nothing during the first part of my shift. Nothing around midnight or 1 a.m. But between 3:15 and 3:20 a.m., that room came alive. The glow appeared. The sound started. And if I pressed my ear against the door, I could swear I heard tiny footsteps running in circles. The security office had access to the old camera feeds from the spring, before room 14 was sealed. I wasn't supposed to look, but curiosity got the better of me. I found the footage from March 15th, the day everything changed. Mrs. Patterson had mentioned a tragic accident, but seeing it on grainy black and white video was different. 23 kindergartners lined up by the window waiting for their bus. Their teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, counting heads one final time. 3:17 p.m. on the timestamp. Then the feed cut to static. When it came back online an hour later, the room was empty except for scattered toys and a few forgotten backpacks. I rewound it 3 times. Same result. 3:17 exactly, then nothing. I started checking the current security feeds obsessively. Every night at 3:17 a.m., I'd switch to the camera positioned outside room 14's door. The sealed entrance never showed anything unusual, just an empty hallway with that yellow tape across the frame. But the audio feed told a different story. If I cranked up the volume and filtered out the background noise, I could hear them. Children's voices. Faint, like they were whispering secrets behind the walls. And underneath it all, a rhythmic tapping sound. Tap tap tap. Pause. Tap tap tap. Like someone was spelling something out in code. The breakthrough came when I realized I was looking at the wrong camera. Room 14 had an internal security camera that was supposedly disconnected after the accident. But buried in the archived feeds, I found it was still recording. The timestamp showed it had never stopped. When I pulled up the feed for 3:17 a.m. from the previous night, my coffee went cold in my hands. The room was exactly as it should be, desks pushed against the walls, chairs stacked high, everything covered in dust sheets. Except for the toys. Building blocks were scattered across the floor in neat arrangements. The rocking horse in the corner swayed gently, its painted eyes seeming to look directly at the camera. And on the whiteboard, written in crayon with a child's unsteady hand, were names I didn't recognize. I grabbed a pen and wrote them down. Emma, Tyler, Sophia, Jamal, Marcus. The handwriting was shaky, like a 5-year-old had written them. But here's what made my skin crawl. By morning, the whiteboard was always clean. Completely blank. As if someone erased it before dawn. I started taking screenshots of the feeds, building evidence that I wasn't losing my mind. Night after night, the same pattern. 3:17 a.m. sharp, and those toys would start moving. The alphabet magnets on the small classroom fridge would slide around, forming words. Simple words at first. Help. Scared. Mommy. But then they got more specific. More desperate. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing, so I did what any logical person would do. I researched the bus accident. The Chicago Tribune archives painted a grim picture. March 15, 3:17 p.m. Lincoln Elementary's kindergarten class was boarding their bus for a field trip to the zoo when a drunk driver ran a red light. 5 children never made it to the hospital. Emma Chin, age 5. Tyler Morrison, age 6. Sophia Gutierrez, age 5. Jamal Washington, age 5. Marcus Liu, age 6. The same names that appeared on that whiteboard every single night. The same names spelled out in wooden blocks by invisible hands. The exact timestamp, 12 hours apart. 3:17 in the afternoon when they died. 3:17 in the morning when they played. Last Tuesday night, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I decided to go inside room 14. I peeled back just enough of the yellow tape to slip through the door. The smell hit me first, that dusty, forgotten scent of old classrooms mixed with something else. Something sweet and cloying, like the artificial cherry smell of children's medicine. The room was exactly as I'd seen it on camera, but being there in person was different. The air felt thick, almost liquid. Every breath took effort. The toys weren't moving yet. It was only 3:10 a.m., but I could feel them waiting. Watching. The rocking horse faced the door now, and I was certain it had been facing the window in all the footage. At exactly 3:17 a.m., my watch beeped. The room exploded into motion. Blocks flew across the floor, arranging themselves into perfect rows. The rocking horse began swaying violently, creaking like an old ship in a storm. Crayon boxes opened by themselves, colors rolling out and drawing circles on their own. But it was the whispers that broke me. 5 tiny voices overlapping, all asking the same question over and over. When is the bus coming? When is the bus coming? I stumbled backward, hitting the door, and that's when I saw them. Not clearly, just shadows the size of children moving between the desks like they were playing a game only they understood. One shadow stopped directly in front of me. I felt small fingers touch my hand, cold as winter morning. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran like my life depended on it. I didn't stop until I reached my car in the parking lot, shaking so hard I could barely get the key in the ignition. I quit the next morning via text message. I couldn't face Mrs. Patterson. I couldn't explain what I'd seen without sounding insane. But here's what really haunts me. Before I left that room, I heard one of the voices call out my name. My actual name. Not the generic Mr. that kids usually say. They knew who I was. And sometimes when I'm lying in bed at 3:17 a.m., I can still hear them asking about their bus. I moved to a different part of the city, but distance doesn't seem to matter. They followed me home. If you've ever worked nights in a place where something terrible happened, please tell me it gets easier. Please tell me they eventually find their way to wherever they're supposed to go. Because I don't think I can handle hearing those voices much longer. Story 2. The unfinished lesson. Some children never graduate. They just stay. Forever trapped in the same lesson, waiting for someone to help them finish what they started. I'm the kind of person who notices everything. Always have been. My mother used to say I could spot a misplaced paperclip from across a room, and she wasn't wrong. It's what made me good at substitute teaching, actually. Kids think they can get away with anything when there's a sub, but not with me. I see the note passing, the phones hidden under desks, the subtle eye rolls. So when I took the long-term position at Roosevelt Elementary last month, filling in for Mrs. Henderson who had some kind of breakdown, I thought I knew what I was getting into. Just another chaotic school near Central Park with overworked teachers and understimulated kids. But there was something about that locked classroom at the end of the hall. Something that made my hyper-aware brain itch with unease. The first day I asked about it during lunch. Room 104. Heavy wooden door with frosted glass, the kind you can't see through clearly. Pre-K room, the principal said, barely looking up from her sandwich. Been closed since last spring. Budget cuts. But her voice had this tight quality, like she was holding something back. The janitor, Miguel, just shook his head when I mentioned it. Don't worry about that room, miss. Nothing there anymore. The way he said, anymore, stuck with me. I'm obsessive about details like that. Words people choose when they're trying not to say something. And that afternoon as I walked past during my prep period, I swear I heard something. Soft, muffled, like children, laughing. By the third day I couldn't ignore it anymore. During my lunch break, I positioned myself at the water fountain directly across from room 104. 23 feet away. I'd measured it. The sounds were definitely coming from inside. Not just laughter now, but singing. That familiar tune kids sing during circle time. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. The clapping was what got me. Synchronized. Rhythmic. About 15 to 20 small hands, I estimated. Through the frosted glass, I could make out shadows moving in organized patterns. Little figures sitting in what looked like a perfect circle. My hands started trembling as I watched, not from fear but from the sheer impossibility of what I was observing. There were no children assigned to that room. There hadn't been for over a year. I marched straight to the principal's office. Mrs. Garrett looked up from her computer with that practiced smile administrators use when they're about to dismiss you. The sounds from 104, I said, not bothering with pleasantries. There are children. In there. Her smile faltered. Just for a second, but I caught it. Miss Peterson, I think you're overworked. Maybe you should take the rest of the day. I know what I heard, I interrupted. My voice was sharper than I intended, but I hate being patronized. Someone needs to unlock that door. She stood up slowly, keys jingling from her belt. Fine. But when you see it's empty, I don't want to hear about this again. We walked down the hall in silence. She fumbled with the keys for longer than necessary. And when the door finally swung open, dust motes danced in the afternoon light. Empty desks. Forgotten artwork on the walls. And in the center of the room, plastic blocks arranged in a perfect circle. See. Mrs. Garrett's voice had that smug edge I despised. But I was already kneeling by the blocks, running my fingers through the dust around them. The floor was covered in a thin layer of grime, except for perfect little footprints. Size 4 toddler shoes, maybe 5 different pairs, forming a circle around the blocks. Fresh prints. The dust was disturbed in exactly the pattern you'd expect from children sitting cross-legged. Mrs. Garrett was already backing toward the door, but I called her over. Look at this. She glanced down and her face went pale. Probably from when we stored supplies in here last month. Her lie was so obvious it was almost insulting. I measured the prints with my hand span. They were too small, too perfect, too recent. And when I looked up at her, I saw something in her eyes that made my stomach drop. Fear. Real, genuine terror. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those footprints, about Mrs. Garrett's face, about the way Miguel had said, anymore. So I did what I always do when something doesn't add up. I researched. Online newspaper archives, school board minutes, anything I could find about Roosevelt Elementary. It took me until 2 a.m., but I found it. A brief article from the local paper buried on page 6. Mysterious illness closes pre-K classroom. Dated exactly 13 months ago. 23 children evacuated after what the article called unexplained behavioral episodes. No details. No follow-up stories. Just gone. Like someone had scrubbed the incident from memory. The article mentioned that classes were suspended indefinitely pending investigation. But there was never another article. Never a resolution. Never an explanation for what happened to those 23 4-year-olds who just disappeared from the school records. The next day, I positioned myself by room 104 during every break. Lunch, recess, prep periods. I had my phone ready, voice recorder app open. At exactly 12:47 p.m. it started again. But this time I was close enough to hear individual voices. High-pitched, giggling. And then, clear as day, "Miss Sarah, can we play the counting game?" My blood went cold. Sarah Chin. That was the name on the old class roster I'd found online. The teacher who'd been in that room when it was evacuated. The teacher who'd transferred to a different district immediately after the incident. I pressed my ear against the door, my breath fogging the glass. The voices continued. One little duck went swimming one day. 23 tiny voices singing in perfect unison. I could almost see them through the frosted glass. Small shadows moving in formation. And that's when I realized they weren't just playing. They were following lesson plans. I spent my weekend digging through the school's archived materials. The basement storage room was a maze of dusty boxes and forgotten supplies. But I found what I was looking for. Miss Sarah's old lesson plan binder. The pages were yellowed, some water damaged, but readable. And there it was. Week of March 15th, the week everything went wrong. Circle time, counting songs. Activity, building with blocks. Afternoon story, the runaway bunny. My hands shook as I read. The exact activities I'd been hearing. The same songs echoing from that empty room. But the final entry made my stomach turn. March 18th, written in shaky handwriting, children won't stop staring at the corner. They say someone is watching them. They refuse to leave circle time. Send help. Below that one last line, barely legible, they want to finish the lessons. They won't let me leave. Monday morning I arrived early. Too early. The hallways were dark, emergency lighting casting long shadows across the linoleum. I needed to see that room again, needed to understand what I was dealing with. My footsteps echoed as I approached 104. But this time the sounds were different. Softer. More intimate. Like whispers. I pressed my face against the cold glass, cupping my hands around my eyes to block the reflection. And that's when I saw them clearly for the first time. Not shadows. Children. Translucent but unmistakably real. 23 small figures sitting in their eternal circle. They were holding hands, their mouths moving in silent song. And in the center, a woman. Young Asian wearing a green cardigan. Miss Sarah. She was looking directly at me through the glass. Her lips formed words I couldn't hear, but I could read them clearly. Help us finish. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering against my ribs. But my obsessive brain was already working, cataloging details even as terror flooded my system. The children's clothes, they were the same styles from 13 months ago. Spring outfits, pastel colors. One little girl in pigtails wore a yellow dress with tiny flowers. A boy in the back had a dinosaur t-shirt. I'd seen those exact outfits in the class photos hanging in the main hallway. My analytical mind was screaming that this was impossible, but my eyes don't lie. Miss Sarah raised her hand slowly, pointing to something behind me. I turned, and there on the opposite wall was a lesson plan chart. One I'd never noticed before. Written in fresh red marker. Week of March 15th. Must complete. Below it, a schedule. Circle time, 12:47 p.m. Block building, 1:15 p.m. Story time, 2:30 p.m. I checked my watch. 12:46 p.m. At exactly 12:47, the singing started again. But now I could hear it clearly, muffled only by the door between us. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. The clapping followed, 23 sets of small hands in perfect rhythm. I watched through the glass as they moved through their routine. At 1:15 they transitioned to block building. I counted them as they moved. 23 children arranging blocks in increasingly complex patterns. Towers, bridges, castles. All in complete silence except for the soft clicking of plastic on plastic. And Miss Sarah, she guided them with gentle gestures, her mouth moving in encouraging words I couldn't hear. This was their normal. Their eternal classroom. But what terrified me most wasn't the impossibility of it all, it was how peaceful they looked. How content. Like they didn't know they were dead. At 2:25, 5 minutes before story time, Miss Sarah looked directly at me again. This time she walked to the door. Her translucent hand pressed against the frosted glass from the inside, leaving no mark, no condensation. Her lips moved slowly, deliberately. Help us finish. The children had stopped their activities. All 23 were staring at the door now. At me. Their small faces were expectant, hopeful. Waiting. And I understood with horrible clarity what they wanted. They'd been trapped here for over a year, repeating the same unfinished week, the same incomplete lessons. Never moving forward. Never growing up. Never graduating to kindergarten like they should have. The storytime bell would ring in 5 minutes, and they needed someone living, to read them The Runaway Bunny. To complete what Miss Sarah couldn't finish. To let them finally rest. I stood there frozen, watching the clock tick toward 2:30. Part of me wanted to run, to pretend I'd never seen any of this. But those faces, those innocent, hopeful faces pressed against the glass. They'd been waiting so long. Too long. I reached for the door handle, my hand shaking violently. The metal was ice cold under my palm. As I turned it, I heard Miss Sarah's voice one last time, clearer than before. Thank you. The door creaked open, and 23 pairs of eyes looked up at me with desperate gratitude. I picked up the worn copy of The Runaway Bunny from Miss Sarah's desk. The pages were brittle, yellowed with age. Once there was a little bunny who wanted to run away, I began, my voice barely a whisper. They leaned forward, hanging on every word. And for the first time in over a year, they looked like they could finally rest. But here's the thing that keeps me awake at night. The thing that makes my hands shake as I type this. After I finished reading, after they all smiled and slowly faded away like morning mist, I found something on Miss Sarah's desk. A new lesson plan. Fresh ink. My handwriting. Week of September 2nd. My current lesson plans. The ones I hadn't written yet. And at the bottom, in that same shaky script I'd seen before, the new teacher understands. She'll help us learn forever. I tried to leave the school that day. Tried to quit. But every time I reach the exit, I find myself back in that hallway. Back at room 104. Because now I know the truth. Miss Sarah never left either. She's still here, still teaching. And now, so am I. If anyone reading this works at an elementary school, if you hear children singing when the classroom should be empty, please, for the love of God, don't go looking. Some lessons are never meant to be finished. Story 3. The Invisible Playmates. I've worked security for 12 years. Warehouses, office buildings, shopping malls, you name it. I've seen drunk college kids trying to break into closed stores, heard raccoons that sound like burglars, and dealt with more false alarms than I can count. So when I took the night shift at Sunshine Preschool in Venice Beach, I figured it would be the easiest gig of my career. Just me, some colorful walls, and tiny plastic chairs. What could possibly go wrong at a place where the biggest threat is usually a forgotten juice box? I should have known better. I really should have. The first week was exactly what I expected, boring as hell. I'd make my rounds, check the doors, scroll through my phone, and count the hours until sunrise. The principal, Mrs. Henderson, had given me a basic tour during the day's shift. Bright classrooms with alphabet charts, a playground that looked like a rainbow threw up on it, and one room at the end of the hallway that stayed locked. Toddler room, she said quickly, not meeting my eyes. We're renovating. Just ignore it. The way she said it, with that nervous laugh, should have been my first red flag. But hey, less rooms to patrol meant more time to watch Netflix on my phone. Everything changed on my 8th night. I was doing my usual 2 a.m. round when I heard it, soft giggling coming from somewhere down the main hallway. Kids' laughter. High-pitched, innocent, the kind that would be adorable during the day but sounds absolutely wrong at 2 in the morning. I stopped walking and listened carefully. Silence. Then, just as I convinced myself it was probably the heating system making weird noises, I heard it again. This time it was definitely laughter. Multiple voices. Coming from the direction of that locked toddler room. I rolled my eyes so hard I'm surprised they didn't fall out. Great. A preschool with ghost children. How original. I marched down that hallway with all the confidence of a man who debunked 1,000 paranormal claims in his head. The giggling stopped the moment I reached the door. Of course it did. I pressed my ear against the wood anyway, feeling ridiculous. Nothing. Not even the hum of an air conditioner. I tried the handle, locked tight just like Mrs. Henderson said. I even knocked, feeling like an idiot. Hello? Anyone in there? I called out sarcastically. The silence that followed was so complete it made my ears ring. I shrugged and walked away, already crafting the joke I'd tell my buddy Mike tomorrow about how I'd communicated with the spirit realm at a daycare center. But the next night it happened again. Same time, same hallway, same innocent laughter that made my skin crawl despite my stubborn rationality. This time I was ready. I pulled out my phone and started recording as I walked toward the sound. The giggling got clearer as I approached. Definitely children, maybe 3 or 4 different voices. I could even make out words. Ring around the rosy, they sang in that creepy sing-song way kids do. My phone picked up nothing. Absolutely nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing and footsteps. I played it back immediately and all I heard was silence. Either my phone was broken or those voices existed only in my head. Neither option thrilled me. That's when I decided to check the security footage. The school had cameras in every hallway and most classrooms. Everything except that locked toddler room, naturally. I scrolled back to 2 a.m., watching myself walk down the empty corridor like some budget ghost hunter. On camera, I looked completely alone. No sounds, no mysterious voices, just me stopping randomly and pressing my ear against a door like a maniac. But then I noticed something in the classroom next to the locked room. The stuffed animals on the reading corner shelf. They weren't in the same positions as when I checked earlier. The teddy bear that had been sitting upright was now face down. The pink rabbit was completely turned around. Small changes, but changes nonetheless. I rewound the footage to see when the toys had moved. What I saw made my coffee go cold in my hands. At exactly 2:03 a.m., right when I heard the singing, the stuffed animals began to shift. Not dramatically, not like some cheesy horror movie. They moved slowly, deliberately, like invisible hands were positioning them. The teddy bear tilted forward in jerky motions. The rabbit rotated in small increments until it faced the wall. A small plastic phone in the corner started rocking back and forth, and I could swear I saw the tiny receiver lift slightly off its cradle. The whole thing lasted maybe 30 seconds. Then everything went still. I sat there staring at the screen, my rational mind scrambling for explanations. Earthquakes? Vibrations from the street? Please. The third night I came prepared. I brought my good camera, a digital recorder, and enough skepticism to power a small city. If something was messing with those toys, I was going to catch it red-handed. But as I settled into the security office around 1:30 a.m., I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The toy phone in that classroom was off the hook. The receiver was dangling by its cord, swaying slightly. I checked the earlier footage. It had been properly placed on the cradle when I started my shift. I hadn't heard it ring, but there it was, hanging like someone had just finished a very important call. The rational part of my brain whispered about settling foundations and loose mounting brackets. The other part, the part one usually ignored, whispered something much worse. At 2 a.m. sharp, the laughter started again. But this time it wasn't just giggling. I could hear actual conversation. Tiny voices having what sounded like a tea party. "More cookies for Mr. Bear," one said sweetly. "Don't forget to share," replied another. My hands were shaking as I switched between camera feeds, desperate to catch something, anything that would explain what I was hearing. That's when I saw them. Not children. God, I wish it had been children. The stuffed animals were moving in coordinated patterns across the classroom floor. The teddy bear waddled in circles while the rabbit hopped in perfect rhythm. A small dinosaur toy crawled along the reading carpet like it was hunting. They moved with purpose, like they knew exactly what they were doing. I watched in complete silence as the toys arranged themselves in a perfect circle on the carpet. The plastic tea set from the play kitchen somehow appeared in the center. Cups, saucers, a tiny teapot, all positioned with the precision of an obsessive child. The toy phone started ringing. Not the electronic beeping you'd expect, but actual old-fashioned telephone rings that echoed through the empty building. Ring after ring after ring. On the security monitor, I could see the receiver bouncing slightly with each ring, but nothing, moved to answer it. The voices continued their cheerful chatter, completely oblivious to the mechanical screaming of that damned phone. That's when I realized something that made my blood freeze. I could hear all of this happening. But the closest classroom was 50 feet away from my office, through 2 sets of doors. I couldn't take it anymore. Against every instinct screaming at me to stay put, I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward that classroom. The voices got clearer with each step. "Tommy's coming back tomorrow," one said excitedly. "Sarah too. We can play the hiding game again." My flashlight beam shook as I reached the classroom door. Through the small window, I could see the toys still moving, a miniature parade of stuffed animals dancing around their tea party setup. But here's what destroyed the last of my sanity: there were empty spaces in their circle. Perfect child-sized gaps where invisible participants sat cross-legged, waiting patiently for their turn to speak. The toy phone kept ringing, and now I understood why nobody answered it. They were too busy planning for the children's return. I quit the next morning. Didn't even finish my shift. When Mrs. Henderson asked why, I told her the truth, about the voices, the moving toys, the phantom tea party. Her face went pale and she nodded, like she'd been expecting this conversation. "The children," she whispered, "they kept talking about their invisible friends. Said they were getting too real, too demanding. We had to close that room early." She paused, looking haunted. "Some of the kids, they didn't want to leave. They said their friends would be lonely." I haven't worked security since then, but sometimes late at night I still hear that phone ringing in my dreams. If anyone else has worked at a place like this, please tell me it eventually stops. Please tell me they're not still waiting for those children to come back. Story 4. The Mirror Children. I used to think the scariest thing about working alone in a school at night was the silence. I was wrong. The scariest thing is when that silence breaks, and you realize you're not alone. I've been doing maintenance work for Boston Public Schools for 15 years. 15 years of fixing broken pipes, replacing burnt-out bulbs, and cleaning up messes that kids leave behind. I've seen it all, or at least I thought I had. But what I found in room 108 at Maple Grove Elementary, that changed everything. I'm writing this because I need someone to tell me I'm not losing my mind. Every morning at 5:47 a.m. I unlock that classroom door, and every morning, those damn toys spell out the same two words, "Help US." The first time I laughed it off. Kids are creative, right? They probably snuck back in somehow. But room 108 has been sealed for 3 months now. No windows, one door, and I have the only key. Let me back up and explain why that room is locked in the first place. Back in March, something happened to Mrs. Peterson's first grade class that nobody talks about anymore. 20 kids, all 6 and 7 years old, came to school one Tuesday morning like any other day. But during morning circle time, when Mrs. Peterson asked them to look in the wall mirrors and describe what they saw, every single child started crying. Not just crying, screaming. They all said the same thing: they couldn't see themselves. The mirrors showed the classroom, the other kids, Mrs. Peterson, everything except their own reflections. The principal called parents, brought in counselors, even had the mirrors replaced. But the kids insisted they still couldn't see themselves. School board sealed the room the next week. Now I'm the only one who goes in there. Part of my job is checking the sealed classrooms twice a week, making sure no pipes burst, no electrical issues, that kind of thing. Basic stuff. The first few times, everything looked normal. Dusty, sure, but normal. The toys were scattered around like kids had just left for recess. Alphabet blocks by the reading corner, toy trains on their wooden tracks. A few old jack-in-the-boxes that the school probably bought in the 80s. Those mirrors that caused all the trouble? Still hanging there, reflecting everything perfectly. Including me. I made sure to check that first thing. My reflection was right where it should be. But something felt off about the way I looked in them. Paler maybe. Or like I was standing farther back than I actually was. The first time I found the message, it was a Thursday morning in late June. I unlocked the door, flipped on the lights, and there it was. 26 alphabet blocks arranged in 2 neat rows on the carpet. HELP space US. My first thought was vandalism. Someone had to be getting in somehow. I spent 2 hours that day checking every inch of that room. Air vents too small for a cat. Windows painted shut and covered with security film. The door lock showed no signs of tampering. I called the principal, told her what I found. She just sighed and said to put the blocks away. Probably just shifted when the building settled, she said. Yeah, right. Buildings don't settle letters into words. But I'm practical, so I scattered those blocks back where they belonged and forgot about it. Or tried to. The next week it happened again. Same arrangement, same message. This time I took pictures with my phone before moving anything. But when I looked at the photos later, they were all corrupted, just static and weird color distortions. I started making notes instead, keeping a little journal of what I found. Tuesday, blocks spelled help US again, but this time a toy train was sitting right in the middle of the letters. Thursday, same message, but 3 jack-in-the-boxes were open, their creepy spring-loaded clowns staring at the mirrors. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the old building's vibrations were moving things around in specific patterns. Maybe the previous maintenance guy had set up some kind of prank mechanism before he retired. I'm good at fixing things because I don't believe in mysteries. Everything has a cause. But then the patterns started getting more complex. The toy trains weren't just sitting there anymore, they were arranged on their tracks in deliberate formations. Figure eights, spirals, and twice I found them arranged in what looked like SOS in Morse code. 3 short track pieces, 3 long ones, 3 short ones again. Now, I never learned Morse code, but my dad was Navy and he used to tap it out on the kitchen table when I was a kid. The arrangement was too perfect to be coincidence. And those jack-in-the-boxes, they weren't just open randomly anymore. They popped open in sequence like dominoes falling. First the one by the door, then the one near the windows, then the one by the teacher's desk. Always the same order. Always perfectly timed, like some invisible hand was walking through the room and triggering them one by one. The dolls were what finally broke my skeptical facade. I'd noticed them before, those old-fashioned porcelain ones with the glassy eyes and frilly dresses that schools somehow always have lying around. Usually they were scattered throughout the room like everything else. But one morning in July, I found them arranged in a perfect semicircle, all facing the largest mirror on the east wall. Not just facing it, positioned like they were having a conversation with their own reflections. Their tiny hands were pressed against the glass, leaving smudge marks that looked disturbingly like real fingerprints. I checked those prints against my own hand. They were too small, too delicate. But when I looked closer at the mirror, I swear I saw something move in my peripheral vision. Just for a split second. Like one of the dolls had turned its head. When I looked directly, they were all exactly as I'd found them. That's when I started arriving earlier. If someone was getting into that room, I was going to catch them in the act. I began showing up at 5:30 a.m. instead of my usual 6 o'clock. Then 5:15. Then 5 o'clock. The arrangements were always there, always fresh, like they'd just been completed moments before my arrival. The alphabet blocks still spelled Help US, but now there were additional words scattered nearby. Cold, dark, can't. The toy trains ran their SOS patterns with a precision that made my skin crawl. And those jack-in-the-boxes, they started opening the moment I walked in. Not all at once, but in that same deliberate sequence, like they were announcing my presence to something I couldn't see. The sound echoed differently in that room too. Sharper. Like the walls were listening. I decided to stay overnight. Yeah, I know how that sounds, like every horror movie cliché you've ever seen. But I'm a rational man, and rational men solve problems by gathering evidence. I told my wife I was working a double shift, packed a thermos of coffee, and settled into the hallway outside room 108 at 11 p.m. I brought my tools, my flashlight, and a digital camera that actually worked. If someone was sneaking into that classroom, I'd catch them red-handed. For the first few hours, nothing happened. Just the usual settling sounds of an old building. But around 2 a.m. I started hearing movement. Not footsteps. Something softer. Like fabric dragging across the floor. And underneath that, a rhythmic clicking sound. Toy trains on wooden tracks. The sounds were coming from inside the sealed classroom. I unlocked the door as quietly as possible and pushed it open just a crack. The clicking stopped immediately. Complete silence. I waited, holding my breath, then slowly opened the door wider. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, and what I saw made my hands shake. The toys were moving. Not fast, not dramatic, just slow, deliberate movements like they were being guided by invisible children. A jack-in-the-box was slowly cranking itself closed. Alphabet blocks were sliding across the carpet into formation. And in the mirrors. God, in the mirrors I could see them. Shadowy outlines of small figures, maybe 20 of them, standing behind the toys. When I looked directly at the room, nothing was there. But in the reflection, they were clear as day. Children in old-fashioned clothing, reaching toward the glass like they were trapped behind it. I stumbled backward, dropping my flashlight. The beam spun across the floor, casting wild shadows that danced like reaching hands. When the light steadied, the toys had stopped moving. The room was silent again. But those mirrors, they were fogged up now, like someone had been breathing on them from the inside. And in that condensation, tiny handprints were appearing. Dozens of them. Small fingers pressed against the glass from behind, leaving marks that slowly faded only to reappear somewhere else. I grabbed my flashlight and ran. Didn't even lock the door behind me. Sat in my truck in the parking lot until sunrise, chain smoking and trying to convince myself I'd imagined it all. But when I went back in at my regular time, the toys had spelled out a new message. Not help US this time. Just 2 words that made my blood run cold. Thank you. That was 3 weeks ago. I've been back every day since, but I don't go in anymore. I just unlock the door, peer inside from the hallway, take note of whatever arrangement they've made, and lock it back up. The messages keep changing. Still here. So cold. Remember US. Yesterday, for the first time, they spelled out something different. Your turn. I don't know what that means, and I don't want to find out. But here's the thing that's really eating at me. I checked the school records. Room 108 was sealed before, back in 1987. 20 children in that class reported the same thing about the mirrors. Same thing happened in 1965 and 1943. Every 22 years, like clockwork. If anyone out there has worked in old schools, if you've seen toys move on their own, if you've ever looked in a mirror and seen children who shouldn't be there, please tell me this ends. Because I'm starting to think 2025 isn't just another year. I think it's my turn to join them. Story 5. The endless nap time. There are 23 children who went to sleep 3 months ago and never woke up. Their bodies breathe, their hearts beat, but their eyes remain closed no matter what doctors try. What I'm about to tell you is why I think they're still trying to wake up, and why I pray they never do. I've always been the kind of person who notices things others miss. The way dust settles in perfect spirals. How shadows fall just slightly wrong sometimes. My coworkers at Greenwood Preschool used to joke that I could spot a crayon out of place from across the room. They stopped joking after what happened last summer. Now they just avoid me. Maybe they think I'm crazy. Maybe I am. But I know what I saw in that nursery room. I know what those toys were trying to tell me. It started 3 months ago when Mrs. Henderson handed me the keys to room 7. Just give it a light cleaning, she said, not meeting my eyes. We're thinking of reopening it next semester. But her hands were shaking when she said it, and I noticed how she quickly walked away. Room 7 had been sealed since June 15th. The day 23 children went down for their afternoon nap and never woke up properly. They're alive technically, breathing, heartbeat steady, but their eyes stay closed no matter what the doctors try. The parents moved them to specialist facilities months ago, but the room stayed locked. Until now. The first thing I noticed when I opened that door was the smell. Not the musty, stale air you'd expect from a room closed for months. It smelled like childhood. Like apple juice and finger paint and that specific scent of small bodies after playground time. Sweet and warm and completely wrong for an empty room. My chest tightened immediately, that familiar anxiety creeping up my throat. I should have left then. Should have told Mrs. Henderson I couldn't do it. But I've always been too sensitive for my own good, reading meaning into every little detail. So I stepped inside, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild again. Everything looked normal at first glance. 23 tiny cots still arranged in neat rows, each with a faded name tag. The reading corner with its oversized cushions. Shelves lined with picture books and educational toys. But as I started dusting, my hands wouldn't stop trembling. Every surface felt slightly warm to the touch, like someone had just been there. I kept catching movement in my peripheral vision, just quick flashes that made me whip my head around to find nothing. The building blocks sat in their plastic bin, perfectly organized. Too organized. I remember thinking how strange it was that they'd been cleaned up so precisely when the children had fallen asleep mid-play. The music box on the windowsill made me pause. It was open, the tiny ballerina frozen mid-spin, but I could swear I heard the faintest echo of its melody hanging in the air. Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, played so softly I wasn't sure if I was actually hearing it or just remembering it. My breathing got shallow, the way it always does when my anxiety spikes. I picked up the music box with shaking fingers and wound it up just to see if it worked. The melody played clear and bright for exactly 30 seconds before stopping abruptly. But when I set it back down, that ghostly echo returned. Softer. Sadder. Like it was coming from somewhere else entirely. I decided to focus on the stuffed animals next. They were scattered across the reading corner in what looked like a perfect circle. 8 teddy bears, 2 rabbits, and a worn elephant with one missing eye. My stomach dropped. I'd worked at Greenwood for 2 years, and I knew those animals were always thrown haphazardly in a toy chest at the end of each day. Children don't arrange things in perfect geometric patterns. They just don't. But there they sat, each one facing inward like they were having a meeting, or waiting for story time. I knelt down, my knees hitting the soft carpet with a muffled thud, and reached for the closest bear. The moment my fingers touched its matted fur, I felt it. A vibration. So subtle I almost missed it, like a heartbeat or a purr thrumming through the stuffing. I jerked my hand back and stared at the bear's black button eyes. They seemed expectant, waiting. I touched another animal, the rabbit with the pink bow. Same thing. That gentle vibration, as if something inside was trying to wake up. My heart was hammering now, that familiar panic making my vision blur at the edges. I stood up too fast and stumbled backward, knocking over my cleaning cart. The crash echoed through the empty hallway outside. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Small ones. Pattering across the floor behind me like little bare feet on linoleum. But when I spun around, the room was empty. Just those stuffed animals still sitting in their perfect circle, now somehow looking more alert than before. I pressed my back against the wall, my breath coming in short gasps. The footsteps had stopped, but I could feel something watching me. You know that feeling when someone's staring at you from behind? It was like that, but multiplied. Like 23 pairs of invisible eyes were fixed on me, studying every move I made. The building blocks were next. I glanced at them earlier, just a normal bin of colorful wooden cubes. But now they were different. Something, had built a tower. Not just any tower. It reached almost to my waist, each block perfectly balanced in an impossible spiral that should have toppled over immediately. The colors formed a pattern I couldn't quite understand, but looking at it made my chest feel tight and strange. Red, blue, yellow, green, repeating in a sequence that felt familiar but wrong. Like a song I'd heard in a dream. I approached it slowly, my cleaning rag forgotten in my trembling hand, and noticed something that made my blood turn to ice. There were tiny handprints in the dust around the base of the tower. Small fingers barely 3 inches long. Fresh prints in dust that should have been undisturbed for months. I knelt down, my knees hitting the floor hard, and held my hand up for comparison. The prints were so much smaller. So perfectly formed. And there were 23 of them. Exactly 23. I counted them twice, my voice whispering numbers into the silence while tears I didn't realize I was crying dripped onto the floor. Each print was slightly different, like individual children had reached out to touch the blocks before. Before what? Before they fell asleep forever? I stumbled to my feet and back toward the door, but something made me stop. A sound, barely audible, like children whispering. Not words I could understand, just soft murmurs and giggles floating through the air like they were coming from very far away. My hypersensitive ears caught every nuance. The way some voices were higher than others, how they seemed to overlap and blend into a gentle chorus. It was the sound of happy children at play, but muffled, distant, as if it was echoing from somewhere deep beneath the floorboards. And then I realized what they were doing. They were counting down. 10, 9, 8. The voices were getting clearer. 7, 6, 5. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those little block houses. Those sleepy window eyes staring back at me. I kept thinking about what Mrs. Henderson had said about reopening the room. How could she not know? How could she not feel what I felt in there? The next day, I went back with a camera on my phone, determined to document everything. But when I opened the door, the houses were gone. Instead, the stuffed animals had moved again. They were no longer in their circle. Now they were tucked into the tiny cots, each one lying on its side with its head on a miniature pillow. 23 animals. 23 beds. And the music box was playing again, winding down slowly like someone had just set it going moments before I arrived. I quit that day. Handed in my keys and walked out without explanation. But it's been 3 months now, and I can't stop thinking about those children. About what really happened during that last nap time. Sometimes, late at night when my apartment gets too quiet, I swear I can still hear their voices counting down. 10, 9, 8. And I wonder, are they still trying to wake up? Are they reaching out through those toys trying to tell someone what went wrong? I need to know I'm not losing my mind. If you've ever worked at a school where something like this happened, If you've seen toys move on their own or heard children's voices in empty rooms, please tell me, because I think they're still in there, still playing, still waiting for someone to help them finish their endless nap time.